What up, everybody? This is Eddie from Smoking Guns Customs. Got a brand new project here. We're getting ready to Cerakote this Ar-15 in a distressed FDE. First things first, let's check it, make sure it's empty. Now we're good to go. Now we're going to remove the rear takedown pin. The lower should pivot down just like this. Now we can remove our bolt carrier group and our T-handle. All right, once you get the T-handle out, we're going to remove the upper from the lower by taking out the front retaining pin. This is just a regular field strip, but we are going to take this gun all the way down into pieces. But before we do that, we need to take out the buffer and spring. The buffer is held in by a retaining pin that you can kind of see here. You're going to push that down, and that's going to release the buffer and spring, and you'll be able to pull both of those pieces right out. Now that we got those out, that's pretty much it for the field strip. We're going to move to the back of the shop and put it on the vise to take it down the rest of the way. First thing we're going to remove is the castle nut, which is what holds on the buffer tube. Here's my AR-15 wrench. This is made to take off a few pieces on the AR-15. Right now we're using it to take off the castle nut. It lines up pretty standard, and you're just going to rotate it down to loosen up that castle nut. Once you get that loose, you'll be able to remove it with your fingers. Now we need to take the end plate off. When we take off the end plate, you need to be careful because there's a spring sometimes under there. Sometimes it's in the pistol grip. In this particular model, it is in the held in by the end plate. So be careful not to lose that. Watch for it, because if you don't, it could pop out or you won't notice it. Make sure that you just pay attention to it. Next thing, we're going to remove the buffer tube. But before we do, let's go ahead and place our finger over that retention plate and rotate the buffer tube just enough to release it to get out of the way, and then we can take out that buffer retention spring and detent. Put that to the side, and then we could just screw off the buffer tube the rest of the way. All right, now that we got our buffer tube off, we are going to be careful to not lose the detent. We're going to take out the rear retaining pin and set that aside, and then we're going to try to pop out that detent that's holding that in place. And there it goes there. All right, now we can set that inside of our bin to make sure we don't lose it. Now we're going to remove the pistol grip. This is held in by an Allen screw, pretty standard size. Once you remove that, be careful because there's another pin or another spring that's holding in a detent that's keeping the safety in place. So that's called your safety detent. Be careful not to lose that spring either. It's very important. And then you can see it's kind of small as well. Once we place that in the bin, you'll be able to take a look at the bottom of the receiver and see the safety detent. That's that little gold piece that you can see there, little brass piece. That should come out pretty easy. Just make sure you don't lose it. It's small enough to lose, so make sure you keep it in a good place. Once you do that, wondering why the safety won't come out, if you're struggling with this, it's not meant to come out unless the hammer is cocked. So cock the hammer back, and then you'll be able to pull the safety right out. Not a big deal. All right, once we got the safety out, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove the trigger pin and the hammer pin, and that'll help us remove the trigger and the hammer itself. First comes out the hammer pin. It's under spring retention, so as you can see, it kind of goes crazy here, but it's only held in by that spring retention, so it's not that hard to remove. Once you get that out, you can just place it to the side. Next thing that we're going to do is remove the trigger pin, which will allow us to take out the trigger itself. Here's me punching it out with, just like I said, a regular punch or a small pin. That's actually, I think, a Glock tool. Once you get that pin out, then you can remove the disconnector, which I'm doing now, and removing the trigger itself. The trigger and the trigger return spring usually come connected just like the hammer and the hammer spring. All right, the next thing we're going to do is remove the magazine catch or the magazine release. There's the button there. If you push that in with a punch, it'll allow you to remove or give you enough space on the other side to start unscrewing the catch. The catch itself has a shaft that travels through the receiver and screws right into the button itself. So Just a couple turns gets that out. Be careful because the button will go flying, so keep your finger over that, retaining that. There's the button itself and the spring behind it. But that's good to go. Next thing we're going to do is remove the bolt catch. The bolt catch is held in by a roll pin that goes right there in that channel that you can kind of see there. It pivots on it. So to remove it, you need quite a small punch. But you want to use the right punch. You don't want to, jam it up. A lot of punches are, the base will be too big and you'll get it all crunched up against the side of the receiver, scratching the receiver. Try not to do that. This really isn't that hard if you have the right tool. But basically, pull that pin out, then you'll be able to pull out the bolt catch. Be careful because there's a pin underneath that, or kind of a detent. Not really a detent because it kind of pushes on it, but behind that is a spring as well. Make sure you don't forget that. A lot of times I've taken apart a lower receiver and forgot those pieces, and then moved the receiver in a certain way, and the next thing you know, those pieces drop out, and I'm on my hands and knees trying to find them. So just be careful with those. Next thing we're going to do is take out the front retention pin. This pin is held in by a detent. You need some type of tool or something to depress that detent while you're pulling out the retention pin. Be careful because that detent will go flying. It's spring loaded, so there's the detent itself. It's really small. If that thing goes flying, you're never going to find it. It's really tough. And don't forget to take out the spring that's behind it. Once you do that, then that's it. That's your lower, and it's fully stripped and ready to go. This is the way that it looks when it is fully stripped with no pins and no internals. Next thing we're going to do is take apart the handguard. This is the retainer right here. It's spring loaded. Pull that down, and you should be able to pull out the handguard on both sides. This is the way that it looks after the handguard is removed. You can see there's a red dot on the gun right now. We're going to take that off. Just a simple Torx head screw. Remove it, and you're good to go. We're also going to remove that rear sight. That's a Magpul M-Bus rear sight. It's either a Allen head or a flat head. I just grabbed the closest flat head I had and just unscrewed it. Once you unscrew it, you can just slide it right off. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is remove the A-post front sight. I'm going to use this fancy bench block here that I got from Brownells. I should take the time to say right here that these pins are tapered, which means they're directional. They only go in one direction, and they only come out in the other direction. And for some reason, Smith and Wesson has reversed the way that everybody else does it, and their pins going backwards. So whenever you're using this bench block, make sure that you're using it in the right configuration if you're trying to take out pins from a Smith and Wesson. I use a short punch just to get these pins started because they are in there pretty good. So I use a short punch, which is a little bit sturdier, just to get them started. A few taps on them should get them to move. If it doesn't, then just get a bigger hammer. Most of the time that'll work. Once I get them started with the short punch, then I move over to a longer punch that will allow them to drive all the way out. It's usually not that difficult, but sometimes it does take a few good whacks with a hammer. But once you get the pins out, it's pretty easy from there on. This is me taking out the last pin. I think that one came out with one whack. So this is the way that it looks once the pins are all the way removed. All right, the next step is to remove the birdcage flash suppressor. I have this vice block here that holds my upper receivers in real nice and tight. Allows me to clamp them down in the vise without the risk of crushing it. Once I get this clamped in pretty tight, then I'm just going to take my Ar-15 wrench. And on the front end of it, there's two spaces that allow you to remove different size flash suppressors. You can see them here and here. This one is going to use the wider one. All right, once you get that, another half turn will allow you to remove the rest of it, the rest of the way with your fingers. Keep in mind, whenever you have a crush washer, the more you crush that thing down, the less likely you'll be able to reuse it. This is me removing the front A-post sight and gas block and gas tube. And now I'm removing the front handguard retainer. Now I'm going to use these 3 prongs on my Ar-15 wrench to loosen up the barrel nut. This is pretty standard. Once you get that in there, just give it another like little half turn and you'll be able to screw it off, or a quarter turn, you'll be able to screw it off the rest of the way with your fingers. So this is your barrel nut slash rear handguard retainer. This piece can come apart a little bit further, but I'm not going to fuss with it. But once you got that off of the gun, that's pretty much it. Your barrel can be removed from your upper receiver. And that is it. That's your entire stripped gun right there. It's all ready for preparation. Make sure you stay tuned for part 2, where I prep everything for Cerakote and Cerakote it. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more content because there's definitely more coming. Thank you guys for all the participation and all the views. Smoking guns.